This is the Rational Reminder Podcast, a weekly reality check on sensible investing and financial decision-making for Canadians. We are hosted by me, Benjamin Felix, and Cameron Passmore. This episode was recorded a few weeks back. We saved it for the holidays so that we could still release an episode without Cameron and I having to come into the office on December 24th or something. But this is a special one. Well, they're all special. This one was just kind of neat. So Cameron was in LA for a conference, and he made the connection with Dave Goetsch, who's the co-executive producer of The Big Bang Theory and a writer. Cameron made a connection with him at a conference that Goetsch was speaking at a while back. Goetsch is Dave, I don't know what to call him, Dave Goetsch. Dave, he subscribes to our investment philosophy, and he's passionate enough about it that he speaks about it at conferences every now and then. So anyway, Cameron met up with him in LA, and they had a really neat conversation.
Yeah, it was fascinating. He invited me to his home, and I just texted him out of the blue because at his presentation, he put his cell phone number up at the end of the presentation. So we get this podcast going. I just texted him. He said, sure, when you're in town, stop by. So I did. A fascinating guy, and the impact that this investment philosophy had on him is unreal. He is a self-described worrier. He worried about all kinds of things, and then he finds himself in LA, which is this crazy city and a crazy industry of ups and downs, and you're always worried about your next gig. And once he had his eyes open up to this philosophy by his advisor there through a book that we will mention in the podcast, it changed him forever. He now embraces uncertainty. He embraces risk. He does not worry about his portfolio at all, and it's given him a great amount of peace in his life.
So we'll get to the episode in a second, but what was your biggest takeaway?
He's a changed guy. He is markedly changed. I didn't know him before, but you hear him talk about how much he worried growing up, and that worry is gone. He relies on his advisors so much. He believes every dollar he pays for advice is worth it, so he can focus on what he specializes in, which is creating comedy. And then we talk a bit about the actual show as well for any Big Bang junkies out there, but he's a changed guy.
That's really neat. All right, well, let's head over to the episode.
This is the Rational Reminder Podcast, and I'd like to welcome Dave very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is very exciting, very interesting to meet you on your home turf.
Yes, welcome. You're welcome to record any podcast here anytime you want.
Well, I may take you up on that. So I first heard you speak, it has to be 2 or 3 years ago, at a conference that we were both at, and you talked about the impact that your financial advisor had on you. And it was a very moving presentation, and I could feel how it did impact you. Can you talk about that event?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a really terrible relationship with money growing up. And my dad was a teacher, and we always had enough money. It wasn't that there was a scarcity. But I think when you take a step back, it really was my deep discomfort with uncertainty and with the future and what's going to happen. And so from a young age, when, you'd see in 1987, I was in high school and the stock market crashed. And then every time it just didn't seem to make any sense, like things would go up and then they'd go down. And so I don't think it's hyperbole to say that my financial advisor really changed my life. And I was a long time to get there. And I didn't even really I didn't know about financial advisors or what they did. And when I first started working on The Rock from the Sun in my 20s as a writer, that was right around the start of the crazy .com boom. And There were a bunch of, I remember everyone in the writer's room buying JDS Uniphase because somebody said that was a great tip.
So and that's an Ottawa company. I drive by where their office used to be every day.
Yeah.
Going to work.
And that was a great stock for a while until it wasn't.
Yeah.
And if people say that, the stock market's too hot when the taxi cab driver is giving you tips, when the sitcom writers are giving you tips, that's the worst time. That's definitely the worst time in the world. And I found myself, I describe myself really as being the chief worrier in any writer's room.
I recall you talking about that.
Yeah, because I could read a newspaper and find something to get anxious about. Reading the business section and thinking, oh gosh, interest rates are going to go and this is going to happen and this is going to lead to that. And I when I was in college, I took macroeconomics with William Nordhaus, who just won a Nobel Prize. And when I heard that he won a Nobel Prize, I just thought to myself, there are so many things I wish he had taught me in Introduction to Macroeconomics, right?
Amazing.
He never told me that you should... He never mentioned stock picking being a bad idea. He never talked about how it's hard to beat an index fund. And he never talked about being a long-term investor. He never talked about all these super impactful ideas, which is what my advisor ended up talking to me about. So what happened is throughout my 20s, I was a sitcom writer. And so I remember sitting down with an accountant and he said, okay, so try to sketch out the next 5 years of your income. What can you anticipate? And I said, well, I might create a hit show and make $100 million, or I might never work again. So could we try to budget for somewhere in between that? And that level of uncertainty...
On average is pretty good.
Yeah, on average. And by the way, I did much worse than average. So that uncertainty left me feeling pretty crippled and disempowered. And I kept waiting for this the crash to happen. And then it did happen in 08 and 09.
Just as you're kind of getting ahead in the game.
Yeah, and we started working that was the beginning of the Big Bang Theory. And my son was born, my first child was born in 09. And I just realized I just can't live like this. And so I read the New York Times article about Gordon Murray.
Phenomenal book.
Yeah, The Investment Answer.
Phenomenal story.
And he was racing to write this book as he was battling cancer. And I read the book and it was amazing. And
how did you find that book?
It really clicked. So there was the New York Times article that profiled it, and I bought it on Amazon, but that was before it even came out. And I bought it on Amazon, and then it came and I just devoured it. And then I looked to see who were advisors who worked with the guys that Gordon was talking about. And then there were two in Los Angeles, and my agent is at CAA, and one of the guys who runs CAA is Brian Lord. And so one of the people they recommended is Blaine Lord.
Yep.
And I was like, I already give 10% to his brother. There's no way I'm giving 1% to the other brother. So I went with the other guys. And it's interesting because when I sat down with them, I thought that I understood everything. I'd read the book. I learned about the power of markets. I learned that you don't have to be a stock picker. You don't have to predict the future. You can have a plan that you feel good about. And I thought that I knew everything that I needed to know. But what's interesting is at the end of that meeting, I said, you know what? I'll give you a year. And then we'll see how the results are, which proved I didn't know anything. That book had gotten me into a financial advisor, which was great. But there was so much more education that I really needed and have since greatly benefited from.
So did you change your mind on giving it a year?
So I've been with him.
Did the advisor kind of correct that framework?
Yes. I think that there's this phrase that I use about being a transformed investor. And so what does it mean to be a transformed investor? And I think a transformed investor is somebody who not just has a plan for the future, is not just thinking about, are my kids going to be able, or am I going to have enough money for college? Am I going to have enough money for retirement? It's about having the faith in your approach so that you don't have to worry day to day, because I was that chief worrier. And if you can stop worrying, then you can spend more time with your kids and you can be a better parent and you can get closer to living the life that you want to live. There's a guy I worked with for a number of years who's such a funny writer, and he's so smart, and he went to MIT and he knows all this stuff. He knows that you can't beat the market, but he still thinks he can. And he thinks diversification is 10 stocks. And it's just so much easier if you think about buying the market and holding it and making some adjustments that you work with your advisor on. The idea of tilting a portfolio or weighting a little bit towards things that academic economists have proven that over the long term seem to have these returns. If you think about this holistically, it really has a profound impact on how you live your life.
Which part has the greatest impact? Is it the planning relationship with the advisor who understands you and your family and your objectives? Or is it more on the academic underpinnings of a empirically smart portfolio? Or is it the combination of all of that?
Well,
like which caused the most worry coming into this?
So I feel like there are these core ideas in the kind of investment approach that you take. There are these philosophical underpinnings, which are things that I desperately needed to hear. And one of them is just this idea of uncertainty, right? So if you go and talk to a lot of advisors, they'll say, well, what's your risk tolerance? And are you 70-30? Are you 80-20? Are you 60-40? And what I've found is, I don't know what I am. Am I like, what does 80-20 mean? What does 70-30 mean? What do these things mean? But if you think more like, how would you feel if you lost 50% of your portfolio? Even that, it's like terrible. How would you feel if you gained 50%? Great. But take a step back from that and think about what is uncertainty. Think about how risk and reward are directly related. The reason that there's a positive return over the long haul on a stock market and not relative to a savings account is because of that risk. And if it wasn't there, then people would arbitrage and exploit it. So you have to understand that there's a risk. But the risk is not whether or not Apple's going to go up, and it's not predicting the future. That was the thing I really struggled with. I just didn't understand why you'd buy these stocks knowing what was going to go up and what was going to go down. But when you take that off the table and say, I'm buying 4,000 stocks around the world, and I'm betting that humans will be increasing efficiencies and build things and progress. If you're betting on capitalism and humanity, and you're taking a long-term approach, then my uncertainty changes.
So tell me how you reacted going through this past month of October, which was a pretty rough month. Did it weigh on you? Did you think about it? Did you peek at the portfolio?
It's so funny because I think about this compared to 08-09. So 08-09, I was in cash. I had nothing. And it was so stressful for me. This last month, I'm obviously, my retirement and everything is all in stocks, and I didn't worry about it at all. It's a bummer. It's a bummer when it goes down and that money was there and it's not there. But, I was thinking about it, how people don't think in the same, I think people think differently about their portfolio because they can look at it, it's a number compared to like their house. Your house goes up and it goes down, but it's still your house and you still live in it and it hasn't changed.
But you don't get a statement showing the value of your house.
Yeah, and you can look at Zillow, and people have been going crazy looking at Zillow and thinking what's changed and hasn't changed. But I think that you still own those stocks just because the value hasn't changed and gone down. And, I remember hearing somebody say who's been in the business for 30 or 40 years or something, he's saying, I hope I live long enough that there is one of these every 10-year corrections, because that means I will have lived longer. And so that's just like a different outlook on life. And it's been a much healthier way to live.
Tell me about your relationship with your advisor. How does it work? How often do you meet?
So we are pretty email-y, and he's available to me whenever, but I find I like texting and emailing him, and I found over time that I can be even more just honest with him and say, look, I need, here's something I need help with. I have to get this kind of insurance for something, and I have a deadline and I can't handle it. So what's feasible? And that kind of trust and rapport is really so invaluable. And it's so different from, I remember having lunch years ago with this friend of mine from high school, and she was working at some big bank and she was an analyst and she had her, industry. And this is even before I knew any of this stuff, but I just didn't make any sense. I was like, wait, what do you, so you study airlines and you predict which airlines are going to go up and down. And how do you have all that information? Like, well, we have really smart people and we have really, and all this stuff. And it just didn't add up to me.
It doesn't.
Because it doesn't.
It doesn't. You think about it, it doesn't. There's lots of smart people.
Yeah, there are tons of smart people, and it's a bet. It's just a bet in terms of trying to time the market. So what's nice about my advisor is that there are none of those conversations. And somebody described it as never having to apologize, because is what has happened in this last month in October, was that something we didn't think would happen? No. Is it something we're surprised by? No. Has it changed our approach? No. Does it stink? Yeah. But do we need, if this money's for retirement? No. And if you need that money, then it's not supposed to be there. Then you're working with your advisor because you say, hey, I might buy a house in the next 5 years and I need to access to this money. So it's probably not going to be money that you want to put in the market like that.
Fees are a big topic, and we've talked about fees on this podcast a fair amount. How do you think about the fees that you pay your advisor?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I mean, I have found every year my advisor has made some suggestion that has more than earned back his 1% fee. And so when Big Bang was happening and it was doing really well, and, I had some money and I was like, look, this is money I want to invest for the long term. These are good years and I want to think about retirement. This is money that I want to earmark for retirement. What can I do? And he said, have you thought about having your own defined benefits plan? And I was like, I have no idea what that means. I don't know what that is. And he explained it to me. And I said, seriously, I can do that? That's amazing. Let's do it. And so that plan, which I don't think that other writers have a defined benefits plan because they don't have advisors. Although there's one.
But you're a bit of an apostle, though, aren't you?
Well, I'm definitely trying to get them all there. And I would like them all to have this approach. For me, I want my friends to feel how I feel. So it's funny because, when you talk about advisors, like, it's not like, I like my advisor. He's a really good guy, but it's not like I'm trying to get more business for my advisor. I just want my friends to feel like me. And so that I want an advisor to help them get what they need. And it's just kind of like they don't know what they need.
They don't know what they don't know what they don't know.
Means. They don't know what they don't know. And it's just, there's so much stuff wrapped up in it. It's so intense. And then, of course, when a married couple, they each have their own baggage that they're coming at. So how do you make these decisions together? How do you talk about it? How do you meet somebody and then say, do I trust that person? That's scary. And there are enough stories. Nobody knows. I have a bunch of smart friends who are successful and make a lot of money. And very few of them know what a fee-only fiduciary investment advisor is. And that's like one of the first things you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know that, you're better off than what stock is a good tip and what looks good.
So it's safe to say the approach that you're following is not the norm in Hollywood.
There are people that are doing it. So it's funny. It's a great question because I don't know, because people don't talk about this stuff.
They don't talk like they did back in the 90s.
There's less talk about what's a hot stock. That's certainly true. There is more of an appreciation for index funds. People get what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can start in a place by saying index funds are great, not going to knock them, but what if you could do better than an index fund? What if Gene Fama once called index funds stupid, not because they're a bad idea, but because they exactly follow what that index is, and they have to, whatever that's called,
replicate.
They have to replicate it, and exactly on this day,
avoid tracking error.
And avoid tracking error. And what if you didn't have to do that? And what if you took a little bit of the investment research and built a portfolio that takes all the good things about index funds, but is a little, on the margins, makes some differences. And can you do better than that? And does that add up? And for me, that really has. It does add up, and it makes sense to me.
So have you pretty much stuck with long-only type investment funds, index funds? Or do you have like private equity, hedge funds?
Yeah, no, I don't have any of that stuff. Because the thing, I went to Yale, and a bunch of these guys that I was never impressed with went into hedge funds.
But Yale's the hotbed of successful investing in private equity and hedge funds.
It's true,
right?
And Swenson and all those guys, right? Yeah. So, well, that's why Nordhaus maybe didn't teach me that stuff. So I feel like there's no need. I mean, it might be great for somebody else, but I don't want to have to worry about that. And I just don't want to be sold genius. I just don't. This guy, you got to meet this guy. This guy or this woman has the perfect model and the best way to do it. And, they've figured out something no one else has figured out. And so maybe that's great. But if that person has only been doing it for 2 or 3 years and doesn't have, not necessarily like, not that past returns indicate future results, but more like, what's your workflow? Does it make sense? Did you get lucky?
Right.
Those are outside my risk tolerance. They might be fine for other people, but they're
I'm guessing Hollywood must be just crawling with financial advisors, and every bank must be here. And
well, I remember a long time ago, I was like, oh boy, I need to get some life insurance, and I asked my friend, and he was like, oh, talk to my guy, he's great. And so he had a box at the Staples Center, and he took me to a Lakers game, and that's kind of like the first red flag where you're like, how do you have enough money to, why are you spending all this money on if you're an advisor or you're working in insurance, why are you spending all this money on a Lakers box? But, it was one of those investment vehicles for insurance that I got very close to doing it. Maybe some of them are good, but when you Google this guy's name, a bunch of these people saying there are all these crazy hidden fees, and he promises these things that over the long term you're not going to get, and that stuff's terrifying, because you think like, well, I don't want to get duped, and right. I don't feel like I have on the one hand, I feel like I don't have the expertise to parse through all this stuff, but by having a fee-only interest fiduciary, that person has to be on your side legally. They have to. They can't sell you something that's going to get them a kickback and a higher fee. And if they're not going to benefit from more turnover, then that sounds great to me.
Your perspectives are fascinating. And the fact that you discovered this whole world and the impact it's had from that book, it's impressive, because so few people would do that kind of homework and then seek out an advisor. And I can feel how it's had an impact on you.
Yeah, it really has. And I think that when a investor signs up with a financial advisor, you might think like, oh, I'm done now, right? And you can be if you want to be. You don't have to talk to that person. You put the money away and you try to max out your 401ks and do all that stuff, and you can do that. But to me, there's this interesting way to think about these ideas in finance and how they relate to your everyday life. And this idea of risk and return being related. And I think that I've spent so much of my life trying to reduce uncertainty or mitigate uncertainty. I remember walking to school in 3rd or 4th grade to the bus stop and trying to think of all the bad things that could happen at school, because if I could think of them, then they wouldn't happen. That was
But then you
was like the OCD version of me. But then I go to Hollywood, which is the most uncertain, the most thing.
It's wild.
It was I mispriced the risk of that. It was a total error on my part, because there's one guy I knew who had been a teacher in my high school, and he had quickly gotten a job on Cheers and had quickly become the executive producer of Cheers. And I thought to myself, well, if that guy can do it, maybe I can do it.
That was your mental model for making that decision.
That was my model. It was
sample set of one.
Totally wrong. It was really, really stupid. So I did misprice that risk, and I got lucky. There's no other way to say that things could have turned out very differently. But what it meant is that when I did get here and I got lucky enough to get on Third Rock from the Sun, and I worked there for 5 years, that I didn't know how to prepare for life after that show. I didn't know that thing of, when you go to the accountant and you say, I might make nothing and I might make a lot, the accountant doesn't know how to help you. They're kind of at a loss. Yeah, that was really hard for me. And my attitude now is trying to embrace uncertainty. That's my mantra. How do you realize that you can either be afraid of the future or you can be open to the possibility of it? And that's hard to do. And it's hard when things go down. And it was hard for anybody in 08, 09, but you saw what happens if you stick by it. And it's no guarantee. We don't know what's going to happen. But I've yet to hear a better plan. Nobody has a better other idea. So I used to think that I needed to save as much money for my kids to try and insulate them and protect them. But I now think I need to make sure that my kids know these ideas and that they can use this to take care of themselves and plan ahead. And the one thing that I'm looking for, which maybe you guys can create, is I want a target date fund for retirement for newborns. So imagine my friend just had a baby, born in 2018, target date fund for 2088 for when you're 70, right? Imagine if you put in $1,000 a year.
Just do the present value of what you need to do to get there.
That's amazing, right? And then think about that compounding that you start, because if you're thinking about like, we got to save for college, we got to do that, that's fine. But what if you had a fund that was just for your kids' retirement, but it was for 70 years away? And the thing that's fun for me about that is I show my son and I say, hey, let's put $100 of that in your retirement. And you got $20 from your grandparents. What if we put that in your retirement? Now let's do the math. You guess what that $20 is going to be worth in 65 years. If you have a rate of return, the market return is about 10%. So let's be conservative and say, what's an 8% return on $20 for 65 years? And what's hilarious is nobody can guess it. Like the amount is always way more than you think. Yeah.
Can we talk about your career?
Yeah, please.
I mean, it's so fascinating, and our audience is so lucky to have this chance to listen to you. So how did you get that? Was your first break at Third Rock from the Sun?
It was my biggest break at the time, but
you take a plane here, you just show up? Like, how does it work?
I drove out to Los Angeles in my grandmother's 1980 Subaru in the winter of 1994, and I arrived in Los Angeles about 3 days before the giant Northridge earthquake. Talk about uncertainty. And I'd never experienced an earthquake. And luckily I was in Long Beach, so I was pretty far from it, but I still heard it and felt it. And my friend who I was staying with was writing for the LA Times, and she ran out of her bedroom because I was sleeping in the futon in her living room and said, I got to go to work. And she left. And then she called me 2 hours later, and she said, I'm in a helicopter flying over the San Fernando Valley as the sun is rising, and I'm watching the fires. And I thought to myself, where have I moved to? This is so far from any reference that I've ever experienced in Connecticut. And so I just ended up calling everybody, every friend of a friend, and seeing if there was some way to get a job. And what happened in my case is my ex-girlfriend's ex-boyfriend's brother was in an a cappella singing group with a guy whose brother was writing at MTV. So it was that random and that far removed. And he was nice enough to set me up with a meeting at MTV. And the first job I got hired on was called Sandblast, which was like the American Gladiators of MTV. And I was a game developer, which means you had to come up with crazy games every week. And I was hired 1 week at a time. And then I worked some more at MTV, and then I had met my writing partner, and he and I got a job on a sitcom for the USA Network. And then the showrunners were fired, and the new guys who came in liked us, and then they gave our script to CAA, and then we were lucky enough to get a meeting at Third Rock from the Sun for staffing season, which is when in May they announced the new shows that are going to be on the network in the fall. And so within a couple of weeks, they have to hire all the staffs for those shows. It's called staffing season. It's when most of the jobs happen. And so I got a call from my agent, And he said, have you ever seen the show Third Rock from the Sun? It's been on since January. And I said, I'm watching it right now with my grandmother in Connecticut. And he said, well, can you be in Los Angeles at 1:00 tomorrow afternoon to have a meeting with Bonnie and Terry, the creators, because they're going to make a decision at the end of the day. And they liked your script.
To be a writer?
To be a staff writer. This would be like our first network big break. And so I said, yes. And I somehow my dad drove me to JFK, and I got on the cheapest flight I could get to. And my writing partner picked me up, and we drove from the airport straight to the meeting. And we had this amazing meeting. And Bonnie and Terry Turner are a married couple who'd worked on Saturday Night Live for years, and then written Wayne's World and the Brady Bunch movie. And they're just so amazingly talented. And after creating Third Rock from the Sun, they created that 70s show, and they're just really wonderful, wonderful people. And so my writing partner and I had this great meeting with them, and the way you get hired is by writing a spec. Back then, it was by writing a spec script. So you'd write a sample of some other show. And I think we'd written a Friends episode. And what we realized later was that the tone of that Friends episode was probably a little goofier than normal, but it was exactly the tone of Third Rock from the Sun, even though we'd never seen Third Rock from the Sun. So it was just so lucky.
Did the Friends episode get produced?
No, the Friends episode never got produced, but it totally served its role in getting us hired on that show. And so then we were staff writers in that first year, and then we rose up through the ranks. And then with Christine Zander, we were the showrunners in the last year, which was a terrific experience. And those 5 years were just really, couldn't ask for a better introduction to the sitcom life. The actors were unbelievable, and the writers were great.
And it must be so amazing. Fulfilling to know all those families at home watching this show are laughing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a crazy idea. I remember thinking, like, what would it be like to write a joke that 1 million people might laugh at?
Yeah.
And I was in China earlier this year and speaking to somebody, and they knew that I worked on The Big Bang Theory, and then they quoted this joke and laughed about this joke. And it's just, when you have those moments, you realize, like, wow, you can work on something that impacts a lot of people. It goes back to that guy who had gotten his job on Cheers. When he described what it was to be a sitcom writer, he said you sit in a room full of people who are funnier than all your friends. They bring you lunch. You put on a play every week, and your grandparents get to watch it on television. And that sounded great.
So from there, you transitioned to Big Bang, and everyone knows it's a monster hit.
So when Third Rock from the Sun ended, I wrote a bunch of pilots and tried to make my own hit show, and failed, and really missed being on staff. And so when the Big Bang pilot, I read about it, and I saw the pilot, and I remember telling my agent, you got to get me a meeting.
You knew it.
So I knew
you had a hunch it was going to be hard.
I felt like when I met with Bill Prady, I met with Bill first, and then with Bill and Chuck. And I remember telling Bill, this is a show I've been trying to write for years, because this reminded me of my friends. And there was something so special about the world that Chuck and Bill had created, and that these actors just totally owned those characters. I was just so excited to be in that world.
And it's just solid, funny. It's just funny. It's so funny all the time.
We have heard from lots of people just some of the sweetest things about how they'll watch an episode again and again, or they'll watch it with families. And yeah, it's incredibly rewarding. And so I started working in season 1, and so on the second episode, and it's been an incredible learning experience. And to see the way we write is we sit around a table, all the writers, and we write the story together. So you get to watch people come up with jokes, and you get to see the connections made. And then the most rewarding thing is one person says one thing, and then that ping pongs off somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And then suddenly you've got this hilarious joke that couldn't have existed in that form unless all those people had been in that room together.
So you write the entire episode all together in one room?
Yeah.
And it's one a week?
So our schedule is that the writers get together in the middle of June, and we spend 8 weeks before the actors show up, and we try to write as many episodes as we can. We can do about 5 or 6. And the process of writing an episode is to just make a list of as many different ideas for stories as possible and find one that, for all the different titles that you see on the screen, the writers are pretty much divided between all the writers who pitch, who make suggestions, and then the person who's the showrunner. So our showrunner right now is Steve Holland. And so we're always pitching to him, and then he'll run it by Chuck and Chuck Lorre. And then also Steve Milaro is doing Young Sheldon, and he used to be the showrunner. And so they have this great rapport where Steve will have an idea he really likes, kind of run it by Milaro, and then talk to Chuck, and then come back to us. And then once there's an idea that they all like, then we start to execute it. So we say, okay, well, what are the scenes that'll be in that story, and then who are the other characters that are not being used in that story, and what are some stories that work with that? And maybe we'll have 2 stories, or sometimes we'll have 3 stories, and then how do we weave that together? And then we just write scene by scene by scene. So we'll start with that first cold open and then work all the way through. And the freedom that goes with that is that we have the chance to follow the story, because sometimes on a regular show, you have an outline and it gets approved by the studio and the network, and you send a writer off for a week to go do it. And when that writer or writing team maybe encounters a story problem or comes up with an idea that's maybe better, you can call the showrunner and say, hey, what about this or what about that? But the reality is you're probably going to execute a pretty close version of what that outline is, because so many people approved it. And with Big Bang Theory, you have the chance to set off on this one path that everyone's agreed on, but if there seems like there's a more fertile area that way, to the left or the right, that we can do that. And I remember early on, I think it was maybe season 1 or season 2, we'd written an episode, and Chuck was sitting down. He was doing 2.5 Men and other stuff, so he would be coming in and out, and he sat down to go through the script with us. And it was probably the second scene that he wanted to change something. And one of us said, well, if you change that plot point, that's going to change the end of the script. And he said, oh, you don't know what the end of the script is. And we all looked around like, yeah, we do. We wrote it. It's in front of you. And his point was that just because it's there doesn't mean it has to stay there. And so he's so focused on that first scene working and that second scene working and being incremental. And I think the effect of it is what you're describing, where, there are these hard jokes, and people can drop in on a Big Bang episode and watch a scene and enjoy it. And they don't necessarily need to know what was before or what was after, but they know these characters and they know what's going on. And that it's been a great lesson.
I could talk Big Bang for hours. It's absolutely fascinating. A couple of other questions I wanted to ask you, though. I mean, you've had massive success with your career and with this show. How do you define success in your own life?
That's a great question. I have come to appreciate the power of people coming together to create stuff. The life of a novelist is a nightmare for me. This idea that you have to sit in a room by yourself with your ideas and just type out this 400-page manuscript, I could never do it. It's terrible. After all these years of sitting in a writer's room, I love and crave that collaboration. And it's been rewarding to do that in teaching and in other projects. And so I feel like success for me is being able to collaborate with a person or a group and try to come up with something that none of us would be able to create by ourselves. And that's a successful collaboration for me. And then personally, for me, success is trying to be a role model for my kids. And I think that has evolved where it's not about what I can't teach my kids to be better people. I think I just have to work on myself and try and be the best version of myself. And there's lots of work. There's always a lot of work to do there.
How do you define happiness?
Happiness is, for me, I think happiness is a process. And I think I crave that collaboration because in that collaboration is the happiness, if it's in a relationship or a friendship or a conversation. And happiness for me is the unexpected spark and maybe the joy that you don't see. I guess it's like, just to bring it back to this investment thing, it's that uncertainty. It's the risk and the reward that comes by taking that risk.
I have a question for you that I was asked to ask you, and I have no idea where this goes, but I was asked about your reaction to getting check 1 of 104 from your first deal on Big Bang Theory.
Oh yeah, so that is...
Apparently it's a great story.
So when we finished Third Rock from the Sun, my writing partner and I got an overall deal, and it was for 2 years. And so this is amazing, right? Like we didn't have to work on a show. We just had to work on our pilots and our projects. And this is the dream that everyone talked about. And
Uncertainty's going down.
Uncertainty's totally going down. And so I got my first check and I looked at it and I was so excited, and it was a great sum of money, and it just seemed amazing, and it was going to come every week. And then I looked and it said check 1 of 104. And my heart sank because I realized this is going to end. And there are only 103 left of these.
Oh, no.
And it was the stupidest thing in the world. I could have just said, look, just enjoy it. You got 2 years. You don't know what's going to happen. There could have been a different framework to that time, which would have changed my life and improved my quality of life and probably given me more time to work on a pilot that might have been more successful. But the anxiety that grew and grew as it became check 2 of 104, check 37 of 104, check 89 of 104. And it got so that I stopped cashing them. And I was just holding on to them because I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a financial advisor. I didn't have somebody who said, okay, we don't know what's happening, but let's put this money in one bucket and let's put this money in another bucket and let's do this and let's realize that if this thing happens and what are your expenses and what do you do? And I just didn't have any of that. So all I could do is kind of white knuckle it and hold on to it because I was so fearful that money would go away. And I remember going to couples therapy with this one therapist once and describing this to her. She said, oh, you just look at my son. If you think like that, you're going to lose all your money. I was like, you're a terrible couples therapist. You need to, I never want to talk to you again because you just made me even more anxious. And that was terrifying. So the irony is that I was right and that all the money did go away and that there was this period between getting jobs where I spent all that money. And that was part of that was not having a plan. So you could say that looking back at it, the fear was justified, but the fear was also because I didn't have a plan. And I think the thing that if I could go back and talk to my earlier self, I would say, don't feel badly that you don't have a plan. Someone has to tell you what that plan is. You don't have to come up with that yourself. Just because you've been good at one thing doesn't mean you're going to be good at this other thing. And there are people to help, and there are people who won't help. There are people who might not have your best interests in mind, but you can find the ones that do, and they can help.
I think that's a great note to end on. Dave, this has been unbelievable conversation. Thank you. You've been very gracious to welcome me into your home and to share these thoughts with our audience.
Thank you. And also to anyone who's ever been a fan of The Big Bang Theory, well, on behalf of all the writers, thank you so much. It's been just an incredible pleasure to be a part of something that people have enjoyed. And I just want everyone to know that everyone involved with that show is just enormously grateful.
Well, I can tell you my kids and I love the show. So thanks.
Thank you.